you out somehow. So, all right. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Wassalatu wassalam ala Rasulih al-Kareem wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. So, I spent some time preparing something a little bit special today. I forgot I got this one on here. This is really too complicated. Um, Not that I don't try to prepare something special every time. Maybe maybe you and I both aren't supposed to be here. Maybe I should go to Long Beach too. Um, so this is, I mean, I've touched on this a time or two before in some of the things that I've talked about, um, and I'll try not to be too convoluted. So I think we discussed this a little bit with with the word taqwa, or maybe the word like subhanallah. Like there's certain either concepts, words, phrases, ideas that we use as Muslims um, that perhaps will tell us what the goal of a thing it is to do, but it doesn't give us the methodology or the how to do that. So, for instance, like we had talked about the word taqwa, how it really is rooted in the idea of like protecting oneself from something. So when Allah says, ittaqillah or fattaqun nar or fattaqu yawm, right? For lack of a better translation, well, really, let's say like protect yourself from Allah or protect yourself from the fire, protect yourself from the day of judgment, right? Protect yourself from these things. So that is what the word is really rooted in. But Allah doesn't tell you exactly how to go about doing that, or فَاذْكُرُ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا, اذْكُرُ اللَّهَ كَثِيرًا, or أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, right? Remember God often, or won't you, أَفَلَا تَعْقِلُونَ, won't you use your aql, won't you think, so to speak? Except it might admonish you like, hey, you should think, but it doesn't tell you how to think. And there are many different ways you can think, just as there are many different ways you could protect yourself from something. So this, on one hand, it's like in many ways, we have the goal, right? But we don't have necessarily the methodology. And in my opinion, um, there's been an overestimation of what the tradition can do. And by tradition, I do like, at least in English, we have this thing called traditional Islam or the tradition of Islam with a capital T. And this generally, or it should refer to, right, the great intellectual tradition that Muslims have produced over the last, 1400 years, from different times, different places, right? Sometimes, though, we forget or become lazy and think that tradition and revelation are kind of interchangeable, that one just picks off where the other leaves off. And this absolutely is not the case. Um, so I wanted to pay attention to actually the word attention, right? Pay attention to tension. And some of this will be a reflection of a book that I'm reading on, and I can pass it around at some point. Um, and at the end, if anybody's interested, I can print out the notes for you too that you could take with you, right? So there's a book written by a Western author. Her name is Gay Watson, and she wrote this book called Attention Beyond Mindfulness. Hopefully nobody will panic when they read her bio. Yes, she is a academic Western trained scholar specifically on Taoism and Buddhism. I am not teaching Taoism or Buddhism. Just have to make this disclaimer because this is going on the internet. But nonetheless, the book is very, very insightful in that it lays out a challenge that most religious traditions today seem to all be kind of suffering from some similar challenges, right? Where we have the goal, right? This is how you're supposed to live, and yet we don't necessarily have the intermediary steps, right, of how to get there. So certainly one of the issues that we do have today is the issue of paying attention. There's so many things that can distract us today, like this stuff, right? Um, Jobs, family, advertising. There's even been some very interesting studies about, particularly living in an urban setting, which includes suburban, ambient noise, right? Like I've often pointed out, like while we're talking, right, there's this huge fan that's running on over there, but for the most part, you don't really hear it until I point it out, right? But nonetheless, that does pull at your attention, right? And one thing that she highlights that I think is worthwhile as maybe one note or takeaway is that there's essentially two kinds of attentions that we have as human beings. There's voluntary and involuntary, right? Some things you voluntarily pay attention to, and some things are involuntary. And some of the involuntary things, and we'll go into it a little bit later, tend to run in the background. I don't want to give too many analogies of like software programs or computers, but akin to something that runs in the background, right? And therefore, they are, though, not two separate things. Your attention is kind of one whole thing. But if that aspect of your attention that runs in the background constantly has something, yanking on it, or what can be thought more of akin to as a muscle that is flexing, right? Well, all muscles get fatigue, right? Muscle can only grow if it's allowed to exert itself and then rest, and then exert itself and then rest. But when you have something that's pulling on your attention all the time, it's like a muscle that is always kind of working out, but not really working out, but it is under stress, and then it begins to fatigue the active part of our attention that we want to use to apply to things. So this is just good for us to think like, okay, in our context, like why are we even talking about this? We're trying to find a way that we can, either be more obedient to God, in some more rounded way, try to improve our lives, both in a so-called Islamic way, but maybe in even other ways. And as you learn it with many things, if you improve something with your Islam, it will undoubtedly also improve some other aspect of your life, that these things, right, they aren't disconnected. And she gives some interesting insight, right, where she says, we hear these phrases associated with the word attention, like pay attention, right? Or, pay attention as a command, right? So as she said, what is attention, right? So of course, I'm an English nerd, so I'm going to try to put my undergrad to use for once, my undergrad degree use for once. So the etymology, right, the linguistic root, at least in English, because we tend to think mostly in English, right? It goes back to about the 14th century, and at that time it had the meaning of like either giving heed, meaning caution, or directing the attention of one's mind to some either specific topic or task, right? Something you were going to do, you had to pay attention to it. And it comes from the French attention, right? And it also then from the Latin. So I'm not going to bore you with all the things that it comes, but it also is related to the words attend and therefore tend, right? So when you attend something, like you're attending this class, right? What do you feel that kind of means, right, to attend a class? Yeah, I ask questions.
Yeah. To be here, to be present.
To be here, to be present. Now, you could be here, but then also not pay attention, right? I did that pretty much my whole academic career. That's why I wound up being an imam. No, so, but it does give the idea of like to come to something, right? To bring, because when you come to class, unlike this weird stuff now for the people out in internet land, right? The old traditional way is you brought your body, and within your body was your mind, right? So it means you brought yourself to a thing. And then the word tend, right? Tend is an interesting word too. This word attention is all related to this, right? You ever heard of tending a wound? What does this mean to tend a wound?
To take care of it.
Right? But what does that mean? Right? A wound is a problem, right? You're hurt. So when you're fixing, you're healing, right? You're dealing with something serious, right? So tending also means like, it can be related to something beneficial, like like healing or something like that, right? So it says that in early, or I guess you say 18th century English, it had the idea of like to consider or to be observant, um, but it also then found its way into the military where you have to stand at attention, right? So it's an interesting word, in the English language, right? And then by about the early 20th century, in the early 1900s, this word popped up, span, attention span, right? Although apparently at the end of the 19th century, it was actually span of attention, and then it flipped to attention span, right? So attention is a skill. It's a faculty that we possess that is similar to our main senses, but it usually involves some combination of them, right? And therefore, we have to think in terms of what can you do with and without attention, right? So what can you do with attention? Learn.
Pretty much everything, right?
Right. Everything you do, right?
Have to pay attention.
But then there's a paradox to this, right? Everything you do requires attention. However, though, we live in the day and age of texting while driving, and people are getting into fatal accidents because they're what?
Not paying attention.
Well, from a certain point of view, they're not paying attention to
One task.
the road, the task of driving.
The main task.
They are paying attention to what, though?
Texting.
Right? The phone, the texting. So the interesting thing is, in a certain kind of way, we always are paying attention. But we aren't always paying attention to what's important. Right? So that's the interesting thing. Like, no matter what you do, unless you're like, a veg, like brain dead or something, right? No matter what you do, you are always paying attention. It's just what you are paying attention to. And it's that competition, it's that discernment of what we ought to be paying attention to is kind of the subject of this and what is so hard about attention, right? So, if you do a thing with attention, right, what is the outcome likely to be? And then again, if you do something without attention, what is the outcome likely to be? So with the first one, if you do something with attention, what's the outcome likely to be?
Should be good.
Depends on what you're paying attention to.
Well,
So it could be positive, it could be negative.
so this relates to something in our tradition we call niyyah, right? Intention. What is it you're intending to do? Now, look, I'm not going to even pretend I haven't been guilty of this, right? Your phone makes a sound, even that vibrating sound. You're in the car, right? It's like slightly involuntary because I haven't trained myself well enough. So I shift my attention from the road to the phone, right? And therefore, this idea of what is the outcome? Well, the outcome depends on what my intention is, right? And that's where it comes down, right? Discernment, right? So the question we can pose for ourselves, A, how does one get attention? Now, we just got through saying no matter what we do, we always pay attention, right? Even if it's just the wrong thing, right? So how can we get better attention or focus? Maybe how can we make sure that we're focusing on the right thing? And since we use the word pay attention, like, A, how do we pay for it? Like, does it accept dollars, bitcoins, litecoins, right? And then most importantly, right, how do you acquire more of it, right? How can you acquire more attention? And in this fashion, I don't mean, because again, I'm always paying attention, whether for good or bad, but what I do mean, how can I acquire more beneficial attention capacity, right? And then, is it something that is separate or within us, right? Is attention separate or is it within us? My feeling is that it's a skill, right? Like I can play the piano or I can play the trumpet or I can make chili, right? It's a skill I possess that I feel is within me, and yet I can't be a piano player without a piano, which is external to me, right? So we're getting now to the point of asking, like, how do we get better? Right? Practice, right? Like any other skill, essentially, because it's not a sense. It's not like sight or hearing, right? It's a combination. You will often use many of your different senses, right? Therefore, attention is a skill that will require practice. The problem is we don't tend to think of it this way. We just admonish people, like children, pay attention, right? But we never teach children how to pay attention to attention. We tend to teach them to pay attention to things, right? Pay attention to this textbook. Pay attention to what I'm saying to you. So it tends to be what I call content-based, right? But we seldom develop the actual skill of attention paying, right? Now, I know this sounds a little bit like the fortune cookie you guys had at the restaurant last week. I'm not trying to sound like, something, convoluted, but it is a little bit, it's in our peripheral vision because we don't talk about it a lot, right? So just like running or playing music or whatever that it is, right? That all of those are skills that require what? Like running, baking, right? But when we say practice, what does practice actually mean?
Doing it over and over.
Oh, repetition. Ritual and repetition, right? Now, in Islam, we have something in our deen, in our way of life, that is heavily repetitive and heavily ritualistic. Can anybody guess what that might be? The salah, right? And then we have some things that we are repetitive, but just on a different scale, like Ramadan, Jum'ah, right? Eid, right? But most certainly, right, the easiest one to see. But then even we think of the salah, but what is another repetitive thing we do in relation to the salah?
Zikr?
Wudu.
No.
Right?
It's reading the Quran.
Right. I mean, yeah, all these are correct. Now, but obviously in terms of repetitive and ritual that you have to do almost every time, right? Definitely is wudu, right? And it's interesting when you read some of the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. Like he was very attentive when he made his wudu. Not like probably how I made my do 20 minutes ago, like, all right, let's go pray, right? Because my attention, my attention is what? I got to lead the salah. I got to set up the camera. I got to get ready to teach my class, right? So now my attention is divided. So I know I have to make wudu, but I didn't necessarily give it its due, right? And part of that comes from an appreciation. What is wudu? Is wudu water on the body? Or is wudu an act of worship? It's an act of worship, right? And this is the horrible thing I shouldn't say horrible, but one of the regrettable things about Islam in the West that Muslims haven't really I don't think they've gotten creative enough. Where do most of us wind up making wudu? In the bathroom. Do you make salah in the bathroom? Can you make salah in the bathroom? I mean, if your life depends on it, but if your life ain't dependent on it, do you make salah in the bathroom? Do you read Quran in the bathroom? So why do we make wudu in the bathroom? That's why, when I'm at home, this is what I love here. And I wish we could find some way, but at least here, there's a kitchen that I can go. It's not a bathroom, right? So if sisters want to go in there, just close the door, lock it, and make wudu, right? Because it's so much nicer than going to the bathroom. Because one of the nice things about wudu, this is a little tangent, but there are actually azkar or like prayers you can say while you're making wudu. We tend to treat the wudu as if it is just like this cumbersome thing we just got to get out the way so we can get to that, right? And yet that is preparing us of where our attention is going to be, right? So the khushu' for the salah, the focus, we use this word, khushu', right? We can just say focus. Where's the focus for the prayer going to begin? Is it going to begin at Allahu Akbar? Right? As I said, how many of us make the takbir, start to pray, and then don't even realize we're reciting Al-Fatiha until we're at Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim. How many of us, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim Malik Yawmiddin Iyyaka na'budu wa iyyaka, like we're literally going through it, and then like you finally kick in and you realize, oh yeah, I'm praying, right? And that's where it's probably good to say Ihdina as-sirat al-mustaqim, right? Guide us, right? Versus if you can train yourself and practice your wudu, right? Not only, 3 times and right, not simply just the order of things, but pay attention to attention itself while making wudu, then your khushu' for the salah will begin there. And this is something we all probably need to work on, including especially myself, so that when you make the wudu, there's not a lot of excess talking going around, so that the mind can calm itself. Because man, we're like, again, we got all this background noise. These lights make noise. I just bought this new mic setup and has this shotgun mic, which is really cool. It's what they use like in Hollywood to film dialogue, right? It can focus on a sound and just exclude everything else. So I've been walking around with this thing with the headphones. It's amazing. Like there's so much noise everywhere, and I wonder why I'm so scatterbrained all the time and can't even find my keys, because my attention is being pulled in all these different directions, right? And I see this a lot. Muslims, we come, we make wudu, we're talking, we're chit-chatting, versus, okay, I'm about to go and stand in front of my Lord, the one who made me. So let me pay attention to attention. Make my wudu, paying attention to attention. Maybe be a little bit silent when I go into the musalla area and listen to the adhan, That's why I love when you call the adhan, because, unlike my adhan, which is tone deaf, and then that way your mind is your attention is set. So when the imam makes the takbir of ihram, or if you happen to be the imam himself, right, that your focus is set, and the salah can have another layer of meaning. And I know that, not everybody understands the Arabic language, and that's fine. But that's the thing, even if you don't understand the Arabic language, and maybe you don't understand everything that the imam is reciting, if you have trained your mind to pay attention to attention, you're not going to wander off into other things. And this is hard, right? Because here's the thing, I see people's minds wandering all the time. Mine does it too sometimes, and I do understand Arabic, right? So don't overly privilege, the Arabic language that it will solve everything for you. So this is just one example of like how paying attention to attention, right, at the moment of being mindful about what you're doing can give you, right, another level of engagement of something that you're going to feel, right, out of, versus just content. Like paying attention, yes, you got to pay attention, 3 times, right and left, ahead and all that, that's fine. But also, I'm making wudu, like paying attention to attention itself, right? The other benefit is you will not be so easily distracted. When you train your right? It's like, some of us remember like watching Michael Jordan play, basketball, like back in the 80s, right? Like or you can see any athlete do this, any really gifted athlete. Like you can just look at their eyes, like they're focused, right? Like they're not paying, you watch this stuff on TV and it's like, it's all compressed to like one dimension, right? But when you see this live, like, okay, you're in a stadium with, 50,000 people screaming, going crazy, people running around the basketball court, but all he's thinking is about this ball going in that basket, that's it, right? And he certainly had, when it came to basketball, an admirable quality of attention seeking and having,
In
right?
the zone.
Yes, exactly. Sometimes we use these words and, now we'll apply it to something else, but not like, even like when we were students, right, you might have your study hour and you're really focusing, but again, it's content focused. Seldom do we actually ever take the time to train our attention to focus in the same way we would train our body, right? And we tend to think of it as, or we tend not to think of it as precisely being that kind of thing. It's like a muscle, right? And it requires training, right? And just like, Like today, like I found out, what happens when you take a couple months off from working out, right? Like it really matters, right? Um, so that, we haven't quite gotten to the methodology of this yet, but we're just kind of teasing it out. And this probably will require maybe a couple of episodes to do, right? So as we get closer to trying to get to a methodology of training our attention, right? The first thing is to ask, right? And it's kind of a rhetorical question, but does attention have any competition? I would probably say so,
Absolutely.
right? Our attention is constantly being grabbed by things, right? Now, this is partly because we're designed to pay attention, right? Allah says, did we not give him two eyes to see? And so Allah talks about how He gave us, abasar wa sama', right? We have hearing and sight and whatnot. So we are designed, in one way, to be able to pay attention, right? And yet, we tend to fall guilty of ghafla, or lack of attention. Like sometimes we call it heedlessness, but or not paying attention to the right thing. And I think that's one part that can't be overemphasized enough. Sometimes when we describe or talking about attention, the idea is like you're paying attention and then you're not paying attention. As we said, no, you are always paying attention, right? Which is interesting because even when you sleep, they say every time you sleep, you dream. Well, you can't really dream if you're not paying attention, right? So you're literally always paying attention, right? It's just what you're paying attention to. And therefore, that comes down to, choices. What am I going to, and then developing that skill set, right? For me, this is akin to, because I'm a diabetic, sugar. I have an enormous sweet tooth, but I also have diabetes, which if I eat a lot of sugar, quite frankly, will kill me or make me go blind or cause somebody to have to saw off my limbs, right? So it has, right, if I don't pay attention to the right thing, it can have major consequences. So, it's kind of like training your willpower. Now, if you don't practice your willpower, right, and if I'm not constantly working on certain exercises to train my willpower, you will notice there'll be some weeks, and even Ishaq noticed a couple weeks ago, he's like, oh, I noticed that you were nibbling on the cookies more, right? And I was like, thank you for that reminder, and it had been a stressful week. So guess what? The stress had impacted my ability to focus, right? So, to pay attention. So yes, attention definitely has competition. And as we said, it's not so much a matter of are you, but what are you paying attention, right? So the how and what of attention, right? The how of attention, like the question is, how does attention work in our daily life? All this sounds nice, right? But how does this work in our daily life, right? And therefore, to what can we and possibly should allot our finite resources, meaning that we can only pay attention to so many things at one time, right? What should we allot them to so that we can live a better life, right? So one of the arching rubrics of this, why are we even talking about it? To live better. Live better as Muslim, and of course, if you live better as a Muslim, you'll just live better, period, right? So this whole thing is about living better. So I thought I would share a few quotes, and then we can, have some discussion. So Watson says that what we do pay attention to is most generally either its absence, meaning like we only pay attention to something when we're not paying attention, right? Or the object or content of attention that is required, ignoring the process itself. So like we said, we teach children like pay attention to this, but we don't teach them how to pay attention, right? And that goes for us as adults. We often, at work, like you have a job, right? And I was notorious for this when I worked in IT. If I had something to do, I did it. If I didn't, I paid attention to something else. And most people in IT, like most computer geeks, are kind of like this. And therefore, it also comes and goes, right? Also, attending, right, which is another way of talking about attention, right? Attending, that overlooked process, is at the very heart of who we are and how we become the person we think we know, right? So that's why it's important. Now I have a note about the word process. Anybody know what does the word process mean? Nowadays it's often associated with like computers, like processing power, but what is process?
It's my work.
Yes. It's your work, so what?
We're waiting.
What is it? We're waiting for the come on, man. You know, I ain't got all the answers up here. Help me out.
I don't know what is the process.
Yeah,
really. It's a process is basically trying to get an output and going through certain activities to get to the output you want.
Right, yeah. So I looked it up, right? And it said a series of actions or steps taken in order to achieve a particular end, right? So one thing that you know, this is in relationship to the idea of attendance. So see, attention, right? That overlooked process. So attention is a process, meaning that it's going to have multiple steps, and it's what you're trying to achieve something particular. So it's not generic; it's something specific. Um, so that's one, right? But it's very true. She said, what? It's at the very heart of who we are and how we become the person we think we know, or what I would like to also is the person we would like to be. Like we will not become the person we want to be, whether that is, 10 pounds lighter, 2 more surahs memorized, whatever your thing is, right? You're not going to get it without paying attention. And that process will be either longer or shorter, more difficult or more easy, depending on how you train your ability to pay attention, right? So we still haven't actually got to that part, right? But we're getting there, right? So she says, in addition, she said, it is as if the accomplishment of mere tasks is the primary value, right? So we tend to do things and think, okay, whatever, like I have to make up my room, or I have to take the kids to school, or whatever that it is, right? And we tend to think that's the primary value. And certainly there is the output, right, of that is value. So, we think that it's just primary tasks of value, while the quality of awareness with which these tasks are undertaken or performed is irrelevant. So we tend to do things, right, and from a very utilitarian point of view, right? Let's say like, I don't know, maybe something artistic or artisan, like I want to make a sculpture, even though, whatever, sculpture's haram, but whatever, I want to make a sculpture, right? That's a joke. So let's say I'll make some kind of artistic sculpture, right? I can, try to dream up the idea of whatever it is that I want it to do, right? But if I don't have the ability to also focus, or some of the skills involved, like I might need to, I don't know, shape it in a certain way. I remember I took this one pottery class when I was in high school, because they were teaching how to make Japanese pottery, and at the time I was obsessed with everything about Japan. So I was like, all right, cool, I'll do this Japanese pottery class, and it was super hard. I mean, it looked easy, like you just take this lump of clay, you throw it on the wheel, it spins around, and right. And I saw the teacher do it, and it was like, and it came up, right? And I'm like, how hard can this be? And I did it, and like there's clay flying everywhere, and I'm cursing and smashing it, and because I hadn't, before sitting at that chair, I hadn't practiced the technique, right? It was something more complicated. It wasn't like, okay, smash a rock, okay, right? There isn't a lot of technique that goes into that. But things that may require technique, that will have a particular end, right? There will be many things that will go along with it. Therefore, I would need to spend time focusing on that, right? So, like I hadn't played piano in like 20 years. So I started taking some piano lessons again, just as a form of kind of like relaxation. And then I realized like how bad my motor skill was, like, cause I hadn't played in over 20 years. And like the first day, it was really embarrassing. I was like, man, this is horrible. Like I almost got discouraged. And I said, no. So I just slowed what I was trying to play. I slowed the tempo way down. And after about 4 hours of paying attention, and then paying attention to attention, which was, not being distracted, like I was able to bring it pretty much back up to tempo and play this one part, right? So it just goes to show you that um, attention is critical to accomplishing particular goals we want. And I know all of these are, kind of like not so-called non-Islamic goals, but believe me, every single thing we want to do as a Muslim, whether it is to have better focus in our prayer, whether it is to control our tongue, right? I mean, this is one of the things that Allah warns us about, that the Prophet ﷺ warned us about, what? Controlling the tongue, because that's where a lot of sins, right, depart from the tongue. Well, how do you control your tongue? You got to pay attention, right? Or pay attention to attention. Be aware of your tongue and what it says, right? So even though some of these examples I'm giving are more banal, right? This all definitely applies to what we would like to do as Muslims, right? She says, attention is at the heart of everything we do and think, and yet it usually is invisible, transparent, and lost behind our fixation with content. So again, just kind of a reminder that the content or either the content of what we want to pay attention to or the product of that really is secondary to training us to focus, period. Especially in this age of distraction. We have many, many things pulling at our attention. And then I have a hadith here. So she said, we pay attention to every moment or we let our attention wander, but we rarely give attention to the process of paying attention and distraction. And this reminded me of this hadith of the Prophet ﷺ, which is, again, is like one of these things we're told, but we don't necessarily know the how to. So the Prophet ﷺ said, inna min husni islam al-mar'i tarakahu ma la ya'nihi, right? The excellence of the Islam of a person is to leave that which doesn't concern him or her, right? Basically, mind your business, right? Pay attention to not paying attention to other people's business is another way to think of it, right? And yet, it's very hard because for several reasons. One, we're curious, right? We're just curious as a species, somebody talks, you'll have people that will come up to you, just keep this between me and you. I'm like, oh man, like it's already gone downhill, right? Or don't tell anybody, or it's a secret. But like, no, it's not a secret anymore. You're telling me it's not a secret, right? We're like Curious George in that way, right? So that's how a lot of those things start, and we all know this. And probably, I won't say I'm not even guilty of it in the past, but this is how we get into blameworthy aspects in our life of just talking about junk we don't have any business talking about, right? And that's hard because maybe you really want to talk about it, or something bothered you, or somebody did somebody, or something of somebody or something offended you, right? And therefore, the question is, how can we develop our capacity for attention so that we can actually pay attention to what Allah and the Prophet are telling us, right? This is what all this is about, right? At least for the purpose of this class, of discussing this, is how can we develop our attention or capacity to pay attention to attention itself so that we can better discern what ought to I be paying attention to? Do I need to pay attention to what Fulan and Bob, Joe, and Mary are talking about? Or do I need to pay attention to what the Prophet ﷺ is saying because he was sent for this very purpose, right? Part of his very purpose is to what? Teach me, purify me, and so on. But that will not happen if I don't pay attention to what he says. Or I cannot receive guidance, right, and actually get its benefit in my life if I don't actually pay attention, right? So when I'm always saying like Muslims don't read the Quran, right, another way of saying is Muslims just don't pay attention. Because if you don't pay attention to the Quran, you won't read it. Or you'll be like that person that's in their salah, they're not paying attention even though they're praying. So you read the Quran, but you're not paying attention. This is my issue with Ramadan and the like juz'a per day Muslim that doesn't throughout the rest of the year have any relationship with the Quran and now attempts to read it in a language that they are not proficient in. And now it's just, for what purpose are you reading this? It would be much better for you to read some Quran every day during Ramadan, but I don't know, read 5 verses and like take it to heart, contemplate it, right? This like I mean, what use to this, this speed reading? I don't see what real benefit this has. Um, and I'm not discounting, yes, the Prophet ﷺ talked about, every harf you read has a hasan. Okay, that's fine for your hereafter. But what do you do until the hereafter? Right? We have all this focus about akhirah. Well, don't worry, the akhirah is not going anywhere. This place is going somewhere, however, right? So the question is, how can I? So in this one hadith, it was just a good example of, right, the excellence of the Islam of a person is to leave that which doesn't concern him. How do you do that? Pay attention to what you're paying attention to, right? Being, well, what the young kids, they say woke. Everybody says woke, right? So going back to this, we talked about, right, there's two kinds of attention, voluntary and involuntary attention. However, there's a play on this involuntary attention that we'll get to in a second. So she says voluntary attention is a skill, something that we can learn through practice, sculpting our brain patterns, enhancing the mind in ways that will deeply influence the people that we will become, right? Now, she makes this differentiation between voluntary and involuntary. The interesting thing about us is that the month of Ramadan, or even fasting any other time, it's about some people would describe, for instance, like the need to eat or drink, and therefore paying attention to eating and drinking. These would be called involuntary, tasks. Like you have to eat, you have to drink, right? Particularly more drinking than eating. You can go for much longer without eating than you can without drinking, right? So some people might consider this to be involuntary, and therefore voluntary attention is like, learning to play the piano or learning to recite the Quran or whatever that it is. Versus this other, and we say, well, actually in Islam, we really push the limit of voluntary attention because Allah asks you for those two primary and then of course many secondary things that motivate us in this life. Sex and food. It's like the two primary motivators for the adult human being, right? And the Ramadan is asking you to voluntarily abstain from things that might be considered involuntary, meaning, even the Prophet ﷺ said, right, if a person who is fasting and they drink out of what? Forgetfulness, which is another way, like they weren't paying attention to the fact that they were fasting, right? There's no sin against this person, right? That what Allah fed you or gave you drink. And the whole point is that that even shows that that mercy that Allah has given us in it is because what? Drinking is, the need to drink in particular it's kind of an involuntary impulse, right? But in Islam, we even try to train our involuntary impulses, right? That's very, very important. And then this part I like. She said, just as pay attention has become a mere phrase rather than a conscious action, right? And action is the important thing here. So the belief that we are creatures of habit. We've probably heard this term too, right? The term creatures of habit has also become an unconsidered adage or just like some word that people use, right? The point is this is all focused in action. This is all rooted in action. Paying attention is not an intellectual discipline in the idea that it's some abstract thing that doesn't require action. No, it's just like working out, right? It is something, it's an action that you do. She says, if we are literally formed by our habits, which to a great deal we are, our brains sculpted by our repeated routines, it surely behooves us to choose carefully what habits we espouse, right? So this is pay attention to your habits. What do you do every day, right? So now we come to maybe the first how-to. And I've done this, and I'm going to actually start doing it again. Because I need to keep practicing it. It's not enough to do it one time. Write down what you do, right? That includes, what you eat, what you drink. Like, just keep a little journal. I have an app on my phone that allows me to log everything that I eat, right? I partly use it just to keep track of my sugar and carbs and these other counts because I'm diabetic. But it's also super useful that it lets you know what you're doing, right? if you keep a log of what you do throughout the day, you just do it for a week, just as a test, or even just 2 or 3 days. Keep a log of what you do. You know, eat, drink, you get the idea. This will give you a window into your habits of who you are. Now, of course, now that you know you're paying attention to what you're doing, you don't want to write down this or that, so you're going to go and do some things that don't get written down. Well, this is good because this is the same idea of like when you did those things before and didn't think about it, guess what? They got written down anyway on your record. Right? In terms of what? There's 2 angels that write down everything, record everything, right? This is a good habit of scrutinizing yourself that will give you hopefully a window into what you're currently doing, and then you can now work towards, you know, they say like, you know, like my brother's a professional comic book artist, but they say artists like that or like sculptors, they pre-visualize what they're going to do. They just don't kind of start, like my brother, it's weird. I see him working on a panel for a comic book, and he'll just start off with like a couple of chicken scratch lines. I'm like, and then slowly refine, and then at the end product, it's like, wow, this beautiful page, and it's, you know, but it just starts off. Now, when I try to, like when I try to draw everything like realistic. I don't build over it, right? And that's why my drawings look like that of a 3-year-old, and I don't mean to insult 3-year-olds. Probably there's some 3-year-olds that actually draw very well. So that idea of start with where you're at, get a good analysis of what you have, and then be honest with yourself, and then begin paying attention. So if you happen to find something that, let's just say, you know what, I found out that I'm consuming 2,800 calories a day. Let's just start something, right? And you're like, whoa, that's a lot of calories, right? Maybe I should trim it to 2,500 calories a day. So I need to say, okay, you know, I'm going to leave this off. So having a latte, I'm going to have a glass of water or whatnot. This is just an example of a way that you can analyze what you're doing in your practice in your day. Or if you're at work and you're working on a project, you know, like keep track of what you're doing. How long did it take you? How many breaks did you do? Did you surf the net? Did you whatever? Really particularly, keep track of how many times you touch your cell phone. How often do you touch it? How often do you check it? How often do you check it? Like this would be a very, very beneficial exercise, because I'm sure all of us will probably be on suicide watch by tomorrow morning when we realize like how much we're on our phones and like, oh my God, like, you know, am I worshiping this thing? You know, does it make rain fall from the sky? Why am I? So this is one of the beneficial ways that we can start. And of course, this is a good lead up into Ramadan itself, which is about, right, examining the heart, right, examining our relationship with Allah. So she says, you know, practice denotes conscious attention, right? If you're not paying attention to what you're practicing, then you're not doing anything at all, right? You have to pay attention while practicing. And I have another note here, right? Denote. Anybody know the difference between denote and connote? I'm just I'm trying to get some money out of this English degree that I have. Trying to milk this English degree I have for all it's worth, right? So in English, we will often use the word denote and connote, right? So like connote means to imply or to suggest, right? Meaning it's not precise. Denote means to precisely, right? Like to be like that's what it is. So when she's saying, right, practice denotes conscious attention, it's another way of saying practice is conscious attention, right? So if you want to practice reading the Quran, right, you're not going to be able to do that if you are not hopefully training your attention span, and then also not putting things around you that's going to distract you, right? So that kind of goes for anything. Unconscious practice becomes so habitual that it is no longer noticed, right? This is a problem. We have this in our salah, just as one example, or like I said, in our wudu, or many things that we do. So this is the beneficial thing about this too, right? If you can, try even just for one day make wudu outside of the bathroom. Now, if you're at work, maybe wait to the weekend, right? But if you're home and you have a backyard or something, right? Just get a little water, a little cup of water, right? Number one, just don't let the water run. People are shocked. I did this last year. I took one of those little cups like that was maybe just 2/3 full, and I was able to make a complete wudu with just one little cup of water. And we all know that the Prophet ﷺ said what? That even if you were standing by a raging river, a person should not waste water, right? And this comes from what? We know these platitudes. Why don't they affect us? Why aren't they lived realities in the community? We're not paying attention to attention, right? We're paying attention to the content. Oh, that's something that the Prophet said. And just like if you hear the Prophet's name, Muslims will say what? Like, what did you say? It's like, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? I mean, even know, like, how is the correct pronunciation? We went over this in my Arabic class, right? The word salah, in one context, right, means to burn, right? And salah means to pray. So one person was aghast because he said, oh my gosh, I was saying, right, burn the Prophet and peace upon him. And it's like, oh boy, Now obviously Allah knows her intention, but this comes from what? Just this unconscious practice becomes so habitual, it's no longer noticed. So you don't even know what you're saying. So I usually, and I have to remind myself, right, I'm not a native speaker of Arabic, but I'm comfortable and proficient of, if I hear his name, right, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right, something more so that, yes, he's going to get the benefit either way in terms of the reward for him or what Allah gives him, right, the dua, but I want, for myself to maintain, if I want to have a certain reverence of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that it comes from one, just this benediction that we say, right? At least that I can just be conscious of versus just the Harry Potter words coming out of my mouth or whatever it is that, they kind of sound like, right? So unconscious practice becomes so habitual that it's no longer noticed. And then good habits require continual questioning, right? Am I making wudu good? Am I holding my tongue? Have I given charity? Am I nice to people? How many push-ups did I mean, you can apply this to literally any aspect of your life. And that she says here, what attention requires practice, right? Meaning that's very different of paying attention, and then also means you might have to have, in the same, like if you want to work out, well, you need to either, I don't know, you're going to need to do push-ups, you need some weights, like you need some kind of activity that will what? Put your muscles under duress. Right? Because muscles only build when they're under duress or under stress. So if you want to pay attention, you need something that challenges your ability to pay attention. So I think for a lot of us, we become so soft, right, that, watching TV, real easy. Reading a 100-page book, like bench pressing a mountain. No, they even show now like college professors, because of all of this stuff, they themselves now find difficulty in reading a 500-page book. People ask me like, man, they come to my house, which is all books, right? I have a massive book collection. I've got books with me all the time, and I'm always buying books. It drives my wife nuts, right? Why? Because I have to push myself, right? Otherwise, I can't do this without reading. Like I have to push myself. And that's important too, right? So think of like, what am I going to do this week to train my attention span? Whether that's, crossword puzzle, Tetris, I don't know, whatever it is. Although my personal opinion, the less of this screen time we get, probably the better, in that we're already going to get enough of it. Like there isn't really an Amish option for us. Like we can't go back to Western Pennsylvania and make wood furniture and eat apple pies. It's not going to happen, right? But certainly cutting back on it would benefit, right? And then she says here, and I thought this, I'll try to end. I know it's getting a little bit late. I said that, Watson highlights attention once inextricably linked, once, it was linked to the idea of philosophy, right? Philosophy, the word itself means what? Love of wisdom, right? That once this is what attention was linked to, gives us something to pause and consider when there's the ayah from Surah Al-Jumu'ah when Allah says what? هو الذي بعث الأميين رسولا منهم يتلو عليهم آياته ويزكيهم ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة. Right, where Allah says what? And He sent His prophet to the or His prophet to unlettered people, a messenger from them. What? To يتلو عليه آياته, to recite His verses to them, but also ويزكيهم, to purify them, ويعلمهم الكتاب والحكمة, that He taught them the book and wisdom. Right? So if this idea that attention was once linked to the love of wisdom, and the Prophet ﷺ came to teach us, like one of the things he came is to what? Teach wisdom, right? Therefore, a large part of Islam is what? Paying attention to what you're paying attention to, so that you can make good choices, right? That's like, a kid goes into a candy store, or even to the supermarket, right? They don't go for the broccoli. They can't make a good choice yet because they're so overwhelmed, A, with the amount of choice, and they haven't been able to train their attention yet to make a good choice. They just want the sugar, right? You get a little bit older, your doctor starts to tell you like, hey man, it's not looking good for the home team. You started to go into the broccoli aisle versus the chocolate aisle, right? So we can end here with this. Just try that out maybe for this week or whenever you have a chance. Track your activities. Food intake, other things, and inshallah this can be something. We ask Allah to make this something beneficial for us to pay attention so that we can benefit both in this life, inshallah, and the next. We'll pick up, on this, inshallah, next week. If anybody wants a copy of the notes that I had from today, I can print them out if you like, inshallah. So, any questions, thoughts, comments? Good.
The name of the app you have to track down your activity.
Oh yeah. It's on my phone. As soon as I turn it off, I can show you.
Talking about attention, you're talking about unconscious, things, that is happening, but, we're not paying attention to. The contact with that, with what Shaitan has make promise to Allah, saying that, I'll keep whispering.
وَلَا يُغَنَّ الْغُرُورُ, right,
Exactly.
that he's just going to constantly deceive you, distract you, make you pay attention to something else,
Exactly.
right? Even with Adam and Eve, right? We've talked about this before, the story of Adam and Eve. They were in the garden. They were in paradise. And yet the sales pitch that Shaitan makes to Adam and Eve is what? Hey, I know Allah told you don't approach this tree, but that's just because He doesn't want you to turn into an angel and live forever. No, you're already in paradise. Therefore, you're already immortal. You're already living there's no death in paradise, right? So they paid attention to the wrong thing, right? So lack of paying attention to the right thing is literally how all of us wound up on this prison planet. So yeah, Shaitan, distraction, right? Because Allah says, well, He has no hope that you will worship something else, but just He can scare you or make you despair or despondent or distract you. That's the main. That's the only soft, weak power that He really has, right? Which we have the capacity to overcome. Inshallah.
I think sometimes we pay too much attention to the worldly life that we don't pay attention to like death.
Right.
Because I actually wanted to ask you this question. A friend called me up like a few days ago, and she said that her friend just passed away, and they found out after she passed away that in her will she actually asked to be cremated. she's a Muslim. So we, she was like, so what am I supposed to do? Because she's not a member of the family. And I said, what can you do? That was
Yeah, I mean, if you don't have any legal power,
exactly.
I mean, that unfortunately will be a mark on that person's record. With those things, it's like her life is done. Um, some things you just have to let go. Yes, it's not right. You should not be cremated, right? So we don't want to necessarily have that confusion. You shouldn't be cremated. But at the same time, if you don't have legal authority, it's not really your matter. So,
Right.
min husn Islam al-mar'a, right, from the excellence, right, of Islam of a person, leave which doesn't concern you. Doesn't mean that it's not right, right? So I would not allow something like that to, A, trouble me to what should I do? And B, even though you could say it's a sinful thing to do, that doesn't prohibit you though from praying for that person. I mean, that's more of what the person needs is prayers because their life has ended, their deeds have ended. Unfortunately, they're going to have one last questionable deed there at the end, and therefore, pray for this person. I mean, that's what you do at janazah, and that's what's permissible to do for that kind of person. Is pray that Allah will forgive them. We don't know how they came to that decision. It may truthfully be an act of ignorance. At that point, that's where speculative thinking is best to leave off, and accentuate the positive. Whether she put in her will to be cremated or not, and if you don't have a legal authority, what you do have legal authority to do is pray for that person.
Do you
Yeah.
think she should at least have advised the family though?
Oh, sure. I mean, that's like the Prophet ﷺ says, well, you see something wrong, you have 3 avenues in which you can try to change it. With your hand, a word, or with your heart. So I certainly would, if possible, let them know that, cause, again, because I've come across this many times. I know a lot of Muslim families that didn't know that cremation is something that is, generally prohibited. Yeah. I mean, trust me. I mean, again, sometimes there's an sometimes there's an overestimation of what Muslims know, right? There's a whole bunch of things Muslims should know. They don't know, or people may not have really come from a very religious. They may be nominally Muslim, right?